All right, so we're going to continue. It's after I've taken a lot of sleep and I'm waking up and I'm trying to finish this review of this enormous 82-page document. It's part 3. I'm going to try to push through this and try to finish it in this 1 hour, but there's a lot of meat and we're only roughly halfway through. Some of the stuff at the end, the exhibits, we don't have to cover, so we don't have to go through as many pages as you think, but still a lot of meat. But let's get right back into it to finish this review. All right, the defendant claims that the grand jury presentation was legally insufficient because the terrorism statute requires attacks on multiple civilians, and defendant only directed his premeditated murderous intent at a single individual by the defendant's motion, page 34. Defendant further claims that he did not intend to intimidate or coerce a civilian population on the grounds that only certain kinds of defined classes, such as gender, race, or nationality, ethnicity, religion, or the like, count as a civilian population within the meaning of the relevant statutes. And then that's according to the defense's motion, page 36. He also claims that the grand jury presentation is deficient since his manifesto did not specifically express an intent to coerce or intimidate United Healthcare employees, and since defendant never released his manifesto to the public, according to the manifesto page, or the motion, pages 37 and 38. Furthermore, defendant seeks to blame law enforcement for intimidating or coercing a civilian population, claiming that law enforcement should not have shared the public information about the tragic circumstances of Mr. Thompson's murder. Now, let's stop for a moment. It gets tedious, and again, I told you I was going to try to push through this. So the tedious part is the whole argument back and forth in the prosecution's document on whether or not the terrorism charge should stick. Their argument here is to counter Karen Agnifalo's claim that it can't be terrorism because a group was not terrorized. In other words, it wasn't trying to create terror in a population. They're going to counter, yes, it was a population. It does match the definition because the entire health industry is considered a population. The defense is saying, well, a population means something like an entire gender, race, whatever, and they're saying no, essentially in this document. The industry is a population as well. It doesn't define in those documents what a population is, so we say it is a population. That's the argument back and forth, and it takes a long time for them to beat it back and forth. They spend a lot of time on the nuances about whether it is or isn't at the standard of an act of terrorism. But their point being is that Luigi Mangione did intend it to be an attack that basically qualifies, in their opinion, for terrorism. And now all of a sudden I'm trying to find out where I was on this document. All right, I found my place again. I had to scroll through it and find my place. Defendant places much reliance on the legislative history of, a certain document that they're talking about, a certain court case, and claiming that the premeditated murder of Brian Thompson in furtherance of a revolutionary anarchistic plan to target the health insurance industry falls outside the definition of terrorism. Simply put, the defendant is wrong. So there's a lot of talk. This is what I want to explain. There's a lot of talk that they keep bringing up about the term revolutionary anarchistic plan. That term is used lots in this document, and it leads to the belief that I think that the FBI looked into myself, and I'll explain that on a member-only video because of that exact phrase right there, the revolutionary anarchistic plan, and I'll explain that on a members-only video, why I think now I'm starting to think maybe the FBI actually contacted me with a pretty clever ruse to try to get me to see if I was an anarchist and a revolutionary. But I'll explain that in a members-only video. That's an aside. So they have a lot of fight back and forth in this document about a specific cases and how it was interpreted by the law. And I think it's a little boring for everybody to read, and it's nuanced. But I'll see if I can get this this thing down here to some bullet points. The bolded language clearly states defendant's conduct here. Aside from the defendant's obvious intent to intimidate the employees of United Healthcare and other health insurance companies, it is abundantly clear that Brian Thompson's execution was designed to intimidate investors and analysts from advising their clients to invest in health insurance companies. So, this is their argument. Luigi Mangione indicated that by doing this at an investor conference, the message would be clear and people would basically say maybe there's better places to invest our money, so therefore it was intended to affect a population of investors or health insurance companies or whatever. So that's their meeting the definition of terrorist. Let me stop this thing for the kitty. Hold on. All right, continuing on. The defendant specifically stated as much in his writings. He explained that the best way to, quote, to rebel against the deadly greed-fueled health insurance cartel was to, quote, whack the CEO. He expressly targeted the health insurance industry, lamenting that past efforts to raise public's awareness about the industry were fruitless. Now, to this argument, if Luigi did write the Fed letter, the confession to the Feds, and talked about Rosenthal's book, he has stated that that book has been out there for a decade or more. It talks in detail about how bad the healthcare system is and how something has to change, and it hasn't affected any change. People have read that book. That book's been out there. The movie by Michael Moore called Sicko, talking about how bad the insurance industry and the health industry and the whole has been out there for a long time, over a decade. It hasn't affected change. So basically, that's his argument, or their argument, that that basically he was trying to raise public awareness about the basically about past efforts to fix this has not worked. The defendant's choice of the occasion for this assassination, the investor conference, likewise demonstrates his concerted effort to broadcast his message of ideological intimidation as broadly and loudly as possible. So, where he picked to do this event and the date that he protected or placed it, so where, New York, outside of a hotel of investor conference, in a very populated place, was designed to send a message to the public, therefore constitutes an act of terrorism, is what they're saying. He characterized the investor conference as a, quote, true windfall, because assassinating the CEO at the annual parasitic bean counter convention would make his point self-evident. So that would be understood from the news headline, quote, insurance CEO killed at an annual investor conference, unquote. And he celebrated how the assassination at that particular time and place would, quote, bring to light the event itself. So again, if those documents are indeed written by Luigi Mangione, meaning the notebook that they're calling a manifesto or a journal, and the confession to the Feds, it does appear that Luigi Mangione did intend to send a message. And so that's what they're arguing. And if they did intend to send a message, then they're viewing that as an act of terrorism. And if we're being fair about it, we can follow the logic. So the real question is going to have to be, again, we point out, the real question is going to have to be, is Karen going to argue that Luigi didn't write those things? Okay, great, you're right, whoever wrote those things may have been saying that, but Luigi didn't write those things. That's the question. Will she concede that Luigi wrote it and it becomes a here's why he did it defense? Or is it going to be he didn't write it, prove it? Okay. The 300 analysts who attended the investor conference were due to convene in a ballroom at the Hilton hotel next to where Brian Thompson was executed, because I believe he was staying at the Marriott next door. The message that defendant was so eager to broadcast was spelled out in his October 22nd manifesto entry. Diary, manifesto, we're going to use those interchangeably. They're going to use manifesto for some reason, even though they started out by saying it was a diary. In that entry, he wrote of revolutionary acts and how to achieve them while garnering the support of the public at large. Clearly, the defendant was seeking to bring about a revolution in healthcare and to abolish health insurance companies. Okay, now this is where it gets super, super sketch and difficult for me personally. I also have a beef with the insurance industry. I am not a murderer. I am not condoning violence and all those things, but I also have a problem with the health insurance industry. I also feel our medical system is out of control. I also feel America is broken. I think greed is out of control. I think all of the things that they're claiming that Luigi is bitching about, I agree with that statement. Now, does that make me a terrorist sympathizer? That's where we're going in this country. We're going in this country to say that Luigi Mangione is a terrorist. And if you then, or I myself, say, hey, he has a point here, let's listen, that will be labeled, I'm fearful of this, that will be labeled as being a terrorist sympathizer. So if Luigi gets labeled a terrorist, and you say that there is any justification for what he did or something that we should listen to or pay attention to, that would be considered a terrorist sympathizer. God help us if we get to the point now in this country where you just have to label somebody a terrorist and now anybody who talks about them is a terrorist sympathizer. I really fear that's where we're going in this country. While this is of no solace to Mr. Thompson, his family, or his friends, the assassination was not personal to Mr. Thompson, but rather a necessary part of the defendant's evil plan to usher revolutionary changes to the delivery of health care in the United States through the barrel of a gun. Now, I want to stop for a moment. I want to stop. This is the part, again, that's going to get me in so much trouble. They get to categorically say that a person is evil for trying to fight against the healthcare system that is out of control. One can argue the healthcare system, and particularly United Healthcare and its denial of claims rates, is killing thousands of people every day, potentially, with their policies of denying claims so that shareholders can make more money. But they want you to say, ignore all that. You can't blame people for doing their job. They're just making money for shareholders. That's what they're supposed to do. And none of it, by the way, is illegal. They're allowed to profit off of people's sickness. They're allowed to profit off the pain of people. They're allowed to do everything they're doing because they're working with the boundaries of the law. And so anyone who fights against that parasitic system, if indeed that's how you qualify it, is evil. And so that's what they're trying to say. Like, you cannot have basically what they're telling you is you cannot have a feeling that the insurance companies or the industry or healthcare in America is bad, because to say that it's bad would be evil. That's what they're doing. Now, granted, ultimately they're saying the killing of Brian Thompson is evil. But the reason why the killing of Brian Thompson happened, according to the prosecution, is because he represented an evil system. But what they're saying is, no, you can't call it an evil system. If you call it an evil system, you're disgusting, vile, and a terrorist sympathizer. That's essentially the message that they're saying. I'm beating it to death because that is where we're going with this argument. If you have a problem with the health insurance industry, you're a terrorist sympathizer. Defendant's sensational assassination of Brian Thompson at the annual investor conference was certainly not a normal street crime. So they're arguing back and forth in this document about a certain case in which it was called a street crime. Certain rival gangs were shooting at each other. An innocent bystander got killed. They tried to call it an act of terrorism, and the defense said that that's an example of this. This is just a shooting against Brian Thompson. You can't use that as an act of terrorism against the population, and we're going to use this gang war fight thing to say that wasn't an act of terrorism. So they fight back and forth about what the intent of that law was. I don't want to get into the details of it, not for this video. We're trying to get through the 3 hours of audio or video for this. Defendant demonstrated in his manifesto that he was a revolutionary anarchist. Again, there's that term. He demonstrated he was a revolutionary anarchist who would usher in a better healthcare system by killing the CEO of the 4th largest company in the United States by market cap. This brutal, cowardly murder was the mechanism that the defendant chose to bring on that revolution. Now, I don't feel by what they presented in this document that they've proven those things. I don't believe they've proven, in my opinion, that Luigi referred to himself. If I did, they quoted it a lot. And I'm like, where did I miss that? They quote he called himself a revolutionary anarchist. I'm not sure he did. And to say that he intended to usher in a better healthcare system by killing the CEO, I'm not sure they made that case either. They're implying it based on things that he said, but I don't think he directly said, we're gonna usher in a new healthcare system because of this. So they seem to be taking a little liberty with where they think Luigi's going with it based on his intent. But again, they did make an intent that it was made a statement. The question is, are they taking it a little too far on? They keep building on it. Here's what he said, and it's bad what they say he said, but then they keep building on it, and now they're adding extra words. He's a revolutionary. He's an anarchist. He's trying to change the healthcare system and usher in a new system, therefore change government policy. These are important things they're trying to build to convince you that it is an act of terrorism because he was trying to change government policy. All right. The plain language of the statute thus refutes the suggestion that murder as a crime of terrorism requires multiple victims. Furthermore, a reading of a specific case in its entirety underscores the legislator's intent to punish murder as a crime of terrorism, even if there is only one victim of the murder. So again, they're using case law to prove that an act of terrorism can be against one person, and the defense's position is it can't be an act of terrorism because it was only one person, not a population. I'd locked up those cats, by the way, and they've gotten through the door, and now they're screaming at my door again, which is killing the audio. I'll go take care of it. Hold on. The inclusion of these two examples makes it abundantly clear that a defendant can commit murder as a crime of terrorism without killing more than one person. Again, it's back and forth on this document. The First Department has thus recognized that murder as an act of terrorism does not require mass casualties, and that the key question is whether the murder was intended to by the perpetrator to intimidate a large population. So again, I'm trying to speed through a bit of this because it's back and forth about whether or not it rises to that level. And then they use this Abu Kamal case as an example. Again, I don't want to get into all the details. I think it's just a bit much for a video that's already gone 2.5 hours and will continue to do so. By the way, I forgot. I'm a mess this morning. I forgot to set a timer to make sure that we're out in an hour. So once again, I'm trying to rush through this. Defendant claims that the term civilian population as referenced in the Terrorism Act cannot encompass the 400,000 employees of UHC. And so they're going to argue that, yes, again, nothing in this discussion would preclude the protection of 400,000 employees of UHC or the hundreds of thousands of people employed by other insurance companies in the United States. New York courts have not tried to define the minimum size of a civilian population. But if they did, a group of hundreds of thousands of civilians surely would suffice. So that's the gist of their argument. Defense is saying it was only one person, so you can't say it was a targeted thing against a population. They're saying a population could include the health insurance industry, which is hundreds of thousands of people. So the question is, did Luigi Mangione target them? Again, all the examples they give of people giving death threats to the United Healthcare employees or other insurance companies, that I would argue is not under Luigi Mangione's control. He's not going out there telling people to call in death threats to people. But they'll say that that's what he intended to have happen. He intended that backlash. But obviously, he is not telling people to go out there and commit those things. In fact, no part of his manifesto tells people to go out and do anything. It seems to be a single act carried out by a single man, and yet they're going to say that his intent was to spur up the population to go do things likewise. Next, defendant claims that whether or not UHC workers can qualify as a civilian population, there was no intent on his part to intimidate or coerce them. To reach this absurd position, the defendant suggests the court to turn a blind eye to the defendant's stated intentions in his manifesto, his deliberate assassination of the CEO in front of the location of the annual investor conference, his markings on the ballistics, and the natural and probable consequences of his acts. The grand jury was in no way required to ignore all of those considerations when assessing whether there was reasonable cause to believe that the defendant intended to intimidate a civilian population. So again, the grand jury ultimately concluded he was intending to terrorize a population. And they're going to give some examples again. For starters, the defendant states in August 15th manifesto that his target is the health insurance industry as a whole. So that he stated it's the industry. He said the health insurance industry, it ticks all the boxes. He also indicated that he had been researching UHC. His October 22nd screened talks of his narcissistic rebellion, quote, against the deadly, greedy, fueled health insurance cartel, a broad threat against those deemed to be part of the so-called cartel. And in the letter to the feds, the defendant states these parasites simply had it coming, and that, quote, these mafioso have simply gotten too powerful. These attacks on UHC and the health insurance industry as a whole speak volumes about the defendant's intent to intimidate those working in the industry. So there's their argument. Defendant intended to intimidate UHC workers is further evidenced by the crime itself. He killed the CEO at an annual investor conference in broad daylight on a busy Manhattan street. Any UHC worker would reasonably worry that if the defendant could kill the CEO, he could do the same to an employee lower on the corporate rung. And to make the point perfectly clear to his target audience, defendant wrote words on the shell casings and cartridge, denied, oppose, delay. Again, they got den because it was missing the Y, but so I'm going to say it the way that I think that it was intended, denied, oppose, delay, as an attack on the health insurance industry, and was a warning to anyone associated with it that what their final fate would be. That part I think is a huge stretch. So they're trying to say Luigi Mangione, by shooting Brian Thompson and writing denied, oppose, delay on the shell casings, was to send a message to the entire industry that they're all gonna their final fate will all be the same. That I think is a bullshit stretch. But that's what they're trying to make, and they apparently convinced a grand jury that that was true as well, because that's why the grand jury said that yes, this rises to the act of terrorism. Defendant may be presumed to intend the natural and probable consequences of his acts. And in the days after the assassination, those consequences predictably
predictably included doctors at UHC quitting out of fear, call specialists receiving death threats, and employees refusing to sign their names to denial letters out of fear of retribution. Defendant thus got what he sought. By deliberately assassinating the CEO in the name of revolutionary anarchism, there that is again, he put innocent employees in the crosshairs of other revolutionary anarchists. This is where I believe that the federal government may have reached out to me to see if I was a revolutionary anarchist and was going to do a similar thing. I can explain that on a private video. But the defendant is nevertheless seeking credit for not choosing to bomb the headquarters of UHC, thereby killing more innocents. You don't get a trophy or any kind of absolution under New York's anti-terrorism law because you only killed one innocent person and not others. So they're basically mocking Luigi Mangione because Luigi took steps by his writings to make sure innocents weren't killed. And they're like, you don't get an award for killing someone because you took steps to make sure other innocent people didn't get killed, because you put the entire industry in the crosshairs. So you can't have it both ways. You killed a person and you intended it to cause a backlash in the population, so you don't get to claim that you're trying to protect people. But indeed, that is how most Americans see it. Whether the prosecution likes it or not, I would argue, and I don't know, but I would argue that many Americans view that act to be a single act against a single man, and that it wasn't designed to hurt anybody else, and that steps were taken by Luigi Mangione to make sure innocents weren't killed. He said so many times, that his concern was to make sure innocent people didn't get hurt. So this is, again, the gist of the argument on the fictional folk hero episode of Law and Order, is that the people realize this guy who shot a CEO wasn't after the population. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone innocent. He indeed viewed the people who were involved, or the person that was shot, as not innocent. Defendant rejoiced that he could commit this assassination at the investor conference, calling it a windfall. As the defendant put it, you whack the CEO at a conference, and all those analysts and institutional investors who came to be wooed by insurance execs, the opportunity is snuffed out in an instant. Instead, the company becomes a hot topic. Perhaps best to invest elsewhere and let one cool off. So that was quotes from Luigi Mangione, allegedly saying that that when the investors see this happening, they're going to find it's best to invest somewhere else. By the way, as an aside, that is something that happened. The investors, I've said it in a previous video, the investors, shareholders, are indeed suing United Healthcare for not coming through with the profits that they were promised. In other words, their argument is, we would have invested somewhere else if we knew that you weren't going to provide the disgusting profits you promised us. So we're suing you for not making real the disgusting profits you promised us. So yes, I think it would be argued in a way that Luigi Mangione's, if that was his intent, that came through, because now the shareholders are pissed that they're not getting the profits that they were promised. So maybe they're going to go invest somewhere else, because that's the gist, in my opinion, of what the shareholders are saying is, hey, we would have invested somewhere else if we wouldn't got the disgusting profits you told us we were going to get. The investors referenced by the defendant were about to convene inside a ballroom adjacent to where Brian Thompson was executed. Clearly, the assassination was designed to send a message to them that there is life-threatening danger in investing in a business whose CEO can be executed on a public street. So he wants investors to stop investing in the company and making them fearful that if they invest in that company, that kind of stuff could happen to them, or it's just a bad investment because their stock's going to plummet. Again, this is speculation because I don't think that's clearly stated. Thus, there were at least 3 groups of civilian populations that the defendant intended to intimidate: UHC employees, other workers in the health insurance industry, and investors and institutional analysts. So those are the populations that the prosecution is saying are targeted. The testimony of United Healthcare Group executive, which is probably Andrew Whitty, I'm guessing, in the grand jury only 2 weeks after the murder, demonstrates the tidal wave of hatred unleashed by the defendant's assassination of Brian Thompson. So it did have an effect, they're saying. There was a wave of hatred against the insurance industry after this. There has been more of the same concern and intimidation since then, and if the court permits, the people will provide evidence of such subsequent intimidation at trial to demonstrate the results of the defendant's despicable crime. So this might indicate that they're saying, hey, look, we've proven to a grand jury it rises to the act of terrorism, and if you want, we'll show that to a jury why it rises to the act of terrorism. Or you can just agree before we go to trial that it is it does meet the definition, and we don't have to spend all the time explaining to them why it meets the definition. Just concede it did meet the definition. But if you want, we'll share it to the jury why. Again, a grand jury is different than an actual jury. The grand jury is just to decide if there's enough cause to go forward with the crime. The jury itself will determine whether Luigi Mangione did the acts that they're claiming he did, and why he did it. Although the why he did it part is not necessarily as important. It's just, did he do it or not? Defendant claims that even if some of his writings expressed... By the way, I want to put it aside. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a legal analyst. I guess I am doing a legal analysis right here. But so a lot of times in court, certain things may not be able to come into the courtroom discussion unless somebody opens the door for it. In other words, there may be an argument to be made that the health insurance industry cannot be put on trial, that this is a murder trial about Brian Thompson. So we're not going to discuss the healthcare industry and whether it's predatory or not. But so maybe the defense can't bring that argument up. They can't bring the argument about, hey, but the health insurance industry, because the judge would say, well, the health insurance industry is not on trial here. The shooting of Brian Thompson is the issue, and Luigi Mangione is on trial, not the health insurance industry. But if the prosecution opens the door by repeatedly saying Luigi Mangione intended to target the health insurance industry, they themselves may be opening the door for a defense and an attack against the health insurance industry. Because by them continually telling you Luigi Mangione did this against the health insurance industry, they open the door then to discuss, why is the health insurance industry targeted? So it's going to be interesting because they may be opening the door to that. The defendant did not intend for his manifesto to become public. This is what the defense said. His manifesto makes clear that he still intended for his actions to convey a message. He boasted that by carrying out the assassination of Brian Thompson at the investor conference, his point would be made in the news headlines, insurance CEO killed at an investor conference, and his message would become self-evident, quote. If defendant now claims that those messages somehow did not capture his intent, then he can make that argument at jury or trial. So they're saying, hey, defense, you're saying that we published his manifesto, therefore he wasn't intending to make this public, yet his very words in his manifesto say that he intended to make it public and was making a point. So those are arguments that can be made to the jury. The jury can hear whether or not he intended it to be a public statement or not. Similarly, it is absurd for the defendant to try to shift all the responsibility for intimidating a civilian population onto law enforcement. So the argument there is that, hey, that manifesto isn't a manifesto. It wasn't designed to go to the public. It was private journal notes, and it didn't become known to the public until the law enforcement told the public that it was out there. And they're the ones that basically scared and intimidated the civilian population, not Luigi, because those were private notes, and it didn't become a threat to the public until law enforcement made it a big spectacle. This is what the guy was doing. He's trying to scare you. Boo, boo, boo. We put it out there for you so that we can show you he's trying to scare you. So that's the circular back and forth argument. Did Luigi intend to send a message, or did he not intend to send a message? Did he intend his notes to be made public, or did the law enforcement make his notes public? So they're trying to say it's ridiculous to blame law enforcement for making it public. Luigi intended it to be public. That's why he shot somebody in downtown Manhattan in broad daylight, because he wanted to send a public message. So don't say that we're the ones that made it public. He made it public by where and how he did it. Okay, so that argument that the law enforcement is the one that did it ignores the elephant in the room. Acts of terror are specifically designed to draw public attention to the act. When you write about the beauty of whacking a CEO at an investor conference and what the headlines will be, you hardly are in a position to complain about the press coverage and fear that you generated by deliberately gunning down the father of two as he walked down a Manhattan or Midtown street. When you write in your manifesto that the shooting, quote, brings to light the event itself, unquote, you make clear that you yourself are seeking publicity, the publicity that your attorney now complains about. So they're pointing out that Karen Mifilo has bitched about multiple documentaries where he's getting all this attention and he's being put on a public stage with the perp walk, and they're saying, your guy wants publicity. He wants it to be a message that the public gets. He wants this to become a public spectacle, so you can't bitch about it becoming a public spectacle because that's exactly what Luigi wanted. In his letter to the FBI that was recovered by Altoona police, defendant wrote that, quote, the spiral notebook, if present, has some straggling notes and to-do lists that illuminate the gist of it. The same person who told the FBI that he had locked down his technology, thus encouraged investors to consult his manifesto in a calculated move to spread his bloody plan near and far. So he's suggesting, they're suggesting that Luigi, by saying if the notebook's present, it contains some notes that illuminate the gist of my issues, therefore indicating that he intended for the notebook to go public. Anyone who works in the health insurance industry had to have been intimidated by the words deny, delay, depose, discovered by the police on the ballistics. They could rightfully fear copycat killers who, reading about the case, would follow in the footsteps of the defendant and execute individuals because they didn't like the company that they worked for. Defendant wrote those words for the specific purpose of spreading violence and hate. So again, on and on and on about why it rises to the level of terrorism. And I guess it's important for us to cover that because you're all going to ask, well, how is this a terrorist act? This is their argument. So while I said I want to summarize it because it's back and forth legal arguments and whatever, it is important to note and answer the question, why does the government think this is an act of terrorism or rises to that level? And this is the argument. As to the defendant's intent to influence government policy or to affect the conduct of a unit of government, that's one of the conditions met in the case, the defendant states that the deliberate assassination of Brian Thompson cannot be the basis of governmental influence because Brian Thompson is not part of a governmental unit. The defendant's claim is contrary to law and logic. So defense says he doesn't work for the government, so Luigi Mangione or the shooter is not intending to intimidate a government issue, but they're saying yes it does because, and I'm going to skip to the beat here, which is that United Healthcare administers the majority of Medicare and Medicaid plans in America, which is a government funded program. So therefore it is against the government. United Healthcare administers a government funded program. Logically, continuing on with the document, the assassination of the CEO of the largest health insurance company in the United States, a company with millions of subscribers and 400,000 employees, is certainly likely to influence the policies of government by intimidation and coercion and affect the conduct of government by murder. Defendant is, in planning this assassination, described it as an act of revolutionary anarchism. So they did again quote, Luigi must have actually used those words they quoted all the time, that he described it as an act of revolutionary anarchism. The plain meaning of those words connotes challenge to government and authority. Because anarchism is, by some kind of definition, basically against rule and law. So and the government is charged with rule and law. So saying you're an anarchist and a revolutionary are terms saying you're targeting the government. That's the argument being made here. Luigi called himself, they're saying, a revolutionary anarchist. Anarchism and revolution both are terms used against a government. Thus, defendant's self-described intent was to influence the government by murder in order to effect change in the healthcare system in the United States. He need not target a public official if the assassination of his chosen target results in intimidation or coercion of government by murder. Furthermore, the plain words of the statute do not require that the victim of the homicide be a government official. So again, there's why they're doing it. And the grand jury was in no way precluded from finding reasonable cause to believe that Brian Thompson's assassination was done to coerce the government or to coerce governmental action on health insurance. So the grand jury ultimately concluded that it rose to the standard of intimidating the government. It is clear from the defendant's stated intent of ushering in revolutionary change to healthcare that the assassination of the CEO of the country of the fourth largest company by market cap, which does business with the government, by providing insurance in the form of Medicare and Medicaid, was committed to affect government policy. So there again is their argument. United Healthcare is in business, is in bed with the government by administering a government program. Therefore, it is again intended to intimidate the government. Defendant's own words in his manifesto make clear that he was trying to coerce and intimidate government officials by the assassination. He used the words revolutionary anarchist to excuse the targeted killing of a civilian. An anarchist is a person who rebels against any authority, established order, or ruling power, and two, who believes in, advances, or promotes anarchism or anarchy especially, one who uses violent means to overthrow the established order, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary. So again, it's by using the term of himself as a revolutionary anarchist, he has stated this is an act against the government. That's what their argument is. Defendant's description of himself as a revolutionary anarchist while plotting Mr. Thompson's assassination thus demonstrates his intent to affect government policy and conduct. All right, I think we're getting close to the end here. Initially, the defendant refused to waive extradition, but after a few days, he had a change of heart and returned to New York. A total of 25 witnesses testified before the New York County Grand Jury. 6 of them came in from Altoona to testify. The remaining 19 witnesses were civilians and members of the New York Police Department, New York County District Attorney's Office, and the New York City Office for Chief Medical Examiner. All of this evidence presented to the grand jury was developed by New York New York Police Department, the District Attorney's Office of New York, OCME, and I don't remember what OCME is, and the Altoona Police Department. So now this last part of the document, and I'm trying to decide how much I want to cover it. This last part of the document is going to be addressing the issue of Karen asking for the federal government's case to go first and not the state. And I think it does require us to delve into it a bit. I was thinking about summarizing, but I know as I'm thinking through it in my head, there's some important points. Meanwhile, the federal's role, so what they're going to argue here, what the prosecution is going to argue is that the state case has been well ahead of the government, or the federal government. They've been building the case much longer than the federal government. They're well ahead, and therefore they're prepared to go to trial, whereas the federal government is still working on their case. That's their argument to Karen Agnifilo. No, we can't put the state case on hold because the state case is ahead of the federal government and is ready to proceed to trial. And furthermore, if I summarize what instead of reading it, furthermore, you asking to put the state case on hold is just designed to basically make the state case go away, because it's going to be years. That's what they're going to say. It's going to be years before the federal government case goes to trial. Now, this is difficult for me because we've already been told, I think, that they're going to set a date in late December of this year, 2025, to discuss a federal trial starting in early or sometime next year in 2026. They're stating, the prosecution in this document, that we know for a fact that the federal case is not going to go to trial for years, not next year, but for years, and therefore the defense is just trying to postpone the trial here, and literally they're going to say long enough that when years later the federal government goes to trial, and years later when the trial's done, that some of the witnesses will have died off, police officers will have retired, and it'll affect and make it harder for them to get a conviction in the state case. That's what they're basically accusing the defense of doing. You're trying to play games by postponing the state case long enough that witnesses won't be around anymore and police officers will have retired, and it'll make it a harder case for the state because they had to wait years to prosecute it. So that's what they're going to accuse them. And whether we read those exact wording or not, I don't know. I put that in there just in case I wanted to wrap up early, because it's been a long time for you guys to sit through this. Defense counsel wrote the court prior to April 9th deadline, requesting that they be able to file an omnibus motion on June 26th. So that's coming up, approximately 8 months after the defendant's Supreme Court arraignment. The June 26th date's coming up, by the way. All right, I think I just accidentally went too far. Meanwhile, the federal role in this instant case began on December 18th, when a writ was served on NYPD to produce the defendant into federal custody. Defendant was taken into custody on December 19th after having been returned to Altoona from the New York Police Department via helicopter. All right, so this is more statements of fact mostly. Defense counsel wrote the court prior to April 9th deadline, requesting that they be able to file the omnibus motion. So again, there's a lot of talk about the timing and whatever, and it's not as important. Every scheduling consideration, the timing of the incident, the progress of the case so far, and the anticipated motion practice demonstrates that the state prosecution is well ahead of the federal prosecution. That's their argument. The state's ready to go, the federal government's behind. So no, we want to go forward with the state case first. Defendant complains that Mr. Mangione will be forced to defend his. So now we're going to address, and it's a long one. And I don't know that we want to get into the nuances. I might decide to do this longer later if your stamina proves true, because again, people are not going to sit through these long videos. I just guarantee you. So they're going to argue about the whole whether or not Luigi Mangione's civil liberties are being impeded because he's forced to defend himself in both the federal and the state case at the same time, with two conflicting different theories about why it was done. And to defend himself in one, it's basically possibly admitting guilt in the other, and so it's not fair to Luigi Mangione. And they're going to argue at length why that's not true. One, the two cases aren't going to happen at the same time because the federal government case is not going to happen for years, so therefore they're not happening at the same time. And it's it's perfectly acceptable for what happens in one trial to be used at the other trial. That happens all the time, and there's no reason that you've made that there's anything new about Luigi Mangione. That's the argument that they're going to make. So I don't want to have to cover every single nuance of how they say that, because again, this is very, very long, and I'm trying to just get through this for you. All right. So that is on the screen is saying a lot of what I just said. You could have paused at that point if you wanted to read it yourself, or you can go look up the document yourself. Yeah, let's continue on. Defendant is in essence asking this court to adjourn the state case for years so that the federal prosecution can proceed at the expense of the state prosecution. And again, we've talked about that a lot. The effect, if not purpose, this is where they accuse the defense of shenanigans by trying to delay the state case. The effect, if not the purpose, of the defendant's motion to this court is to delay the trial in the state case so as to make it more difficult for the prosecution to pursue the charges for which the defendant was indicted in New York by a grand jury. What is fresh in the witness's mind today will fade with time. Police officers will retire and move to new locations, calling into question their availability. So they're basically saying, look, a grand jury has decided this is worthy of going to trial. We're ready to go to trial. Everyone's set and ready to go to trial. You want to postpone this so that everybody forgets why we made the decision to do this in the first place. And they're accusing that as being a deliberate tactic of the defense. Any stall or delay of this state case as proposed in these circumstances appears to be a defense effort seeking to decay and eventual death of the prosecution case via disfavored calendar control on a de facto reserved docket when the prosecution is ready. Again, their statement. We are ready. The state is ready to go forward, and the defense wants to stall this to the point that this case will just die off because time has gone by and it's just it's not important anymore. That's the gist of the argument. So while I'm rambling here, I'm going to scroll down to see if there's anything more. Defendant is free to testify at a state trial. He might prefer that his state court testimony not be introduced against him at the subsequent federal trial, but nothing in their federal case law suggests that there would be any unfairness in the introduction of such testimony. So again, you're saying it's not fair that the state case might prejudice him in the federal case, but that happens all the time. So too bad. That's essentially the gist of that. This is a big one. It is the defendant's myth that having made a ghost gun, which he cowardly used to shoot an innocent man in the back, is somehow the victim whose rights are being violated when the state seeks to hold him accountable for his dastardly deed. So they're saying Mr. Mangione killed somebody in a cowardly act of shooting an innocent man in the back, and now he wants to be claiming the whole, hey, you're violating my civil liberties. Well, you violated somebody else's civil liberties, so wah, is their response to that. Defendant expresses concern that publicity surrounding his state proceedings could make it impossible for him to find a fair and impartial jury in a federal court. But this newly found aversion to publicity is curious. So they're basically saying, you want to claim, hey, it's not fair that everybody's talking about this case, but you're the one that made it public by where and how you did it. At the defendant's arraignment, defense counsel consented, so defense consented to televised coverage while alleging that Mayor Adams had violated their defendant's rights. Defense counsel also wrote the court on March 26, requesting that all court proceedings be televised. The motion behind this request is obvious. Rather than using these proceedings as a way to litigate his guilt or innocence, the defendant is seeking to use these proceedings to attract media attention and broadcast his ideological views to the public. Now that, I think, is a little unfair. So they're arguing the defense is being two-faced and double standards and all those things because they're saying it's not fair that everyone knows about Luigi and you're making him a big, huge public spectacle, but yet we want this all televised. Here's why it's not. That's a little bit bullshit. Once a person's been accused, most of us would want a fair and open trial so we all can see in America with our own eyes whether or not justice is being upheld. We don't like private courts. We don't like things being done behind closed doors and then just getting told, trust us, we got it right. We want to see for ourselves. So it makes sense that the defense would want this to be a public trial, that they want people to be able to see that no shenanigans are going on and see for themselves what happened. The prosecution is trying to sound like this is a ridiculous double standard. You bitch about being a public spectacle and yet you want the trial to be on a public display. Well, yes, at the point now that you're going to try to murder Luigi Mangione by a court, then they want that on trial. by the public, so the public can make the determination if Luigi Mangione was truly guilty or deserving of death. The defense team put together a website for the defendant that contains statements made by Friedman Agnifilo, both inside and outside of court, as well as statements made by the defendant. In February 21st statement, Mrs. Friedman Agnifilo accused the NYPD chief of detectives of prejudicing defendants' rights in a fair trial by appearing on an HBO special while discussing the evidence. Thus, Mrs. Friedman Agnifilo once again publicized the alleged prejudicial information that she complained about, alerting everyone who accused their defendant's website on their defendant's website that there was an HBO special on the case. So, in other words, I didn't read that well, but they're saying, well, if you have a problem about the HBO special, why are you going out on his website telling everybody there's an HBO special? So you are the one broadcasting the HBO special. You can't complain. You can't go and tell everybody, hey, everybody, there's an HBO special about my client, and then say the fact that it's out there is making people prejudiced against my client. That website links to a Give, Send, Go fundraiser website. They're going to basically shame everybody for donating money to Luigi Mangione at this point. The website links to the Give, Send, Go fundraising website. And this is where they get nasty, by the way, and they start to mockingly say Luigi maybe should get a better defense team. If he needs help from the public to defend himself and he can't afford his lawyers, maybe he needs to get cheaper lawyers. Maybe he needs to go find a different counsel if he can't afford them. This is where it gets real personal in here. The defense also seeks to attract media attention by publicizing the defendant's revolutionary message and complaining of mistreatment. Quote, the fund is irrefutable evidence of the public's support for Luigi and their consciousness that he is being treated in an unprecedented and unfair fashion by the state, acting out of cowardice and fear to make a spectacle of his case, to intimidate us all into submission to state and corporate power. So that's Karen's quote from the website, and they're saying that this is hypocritical. Defendant, the self-described revolutionary anarchist, they're responding, of his manifesto once again advertises his terroristic intent in his appeal for funds to fight state and corporate power. So it's a back and forth argument. The state says Luigi Mangione wants to fight the system and be an anarchist, and then you're bitching because we want to make this a public spectacle. You can't have it both ways. To the extent that the defendant complains about pretrial publicity, suffice it to say the defense team has shown a great interest in trying to get the case in the court of public opinion than in the trial court. So in other words, the fact now that the defense wants a televised trial means that they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. We want to say that the public's being biased, but we want the public to see every part of this trial. Well, again, it makes a difference once the man's on trial. We want to see the trial once it's on trial. If all of this had been kept out of the public, all of it, then none of it would have to be publicized. But if you're going to put the man on trial, now they want it in the public. I don't understand why it's so hard for the prosecution to see that, but they're trying to make the case that this is hypocritical. You either want publicity or you don't. Well, they didn't want publicity necessarily until it's clear you're going to go to trial. If you're going to go to trial, then let's make it public. As to the real challenge of picking a fair and impartial jury, it should be noted that since the state trial could be completed years before the federal trial is to begin, the mere passage of time will help minimize the influence of the state trial on the federal prosecution. So they're saying, yes, hey, look, just like you wanted to wait years for the prosecution to go in the state, which would make it weaker for them, you also have the benefit of if we go right now and the federal government takes years to come to their trial, people will forget what happened to the state trial by the time we get around to the federal trial. So again, quit your bitching is what they're basically getting to. Let's try to wrap this up pretty soon here. Defendant has a law firm, Agnifilo Intrader, representing him and also assisted by Avi Moskowitz, an attorney with the expertise in death penalty cases. If the two prosecutors are too much for Agnifilo Intrader to manage, then it may be appropriate for the defendant to hire a different attorney. That was just shitty. The defendant's Give, Send, Go fundraising website reports that the fund surpassed the $1 million mark on March 6. Certainly these funds can be used to hire a new counsel should the task of representing the defendant in multiple proceedings be too onerous for Agnifilo Intrader. So they're basically being shitty to Karen. If you say it's too much to fight your defendant or defend your defendant on two different cases, hey, Luigi's got a ton of money, so go use that money to go hire some other lawyers. It was a shitty thing to say, in my opinion. But there you have it. So they're fighting again back and forth about whether or not it should be done in a timely fashion, and we're done with the letter. Look at that. Now we go into exhibits, which I'll show briefly. This is a sideways scan, if you will. I don't know if I can easily rotate it. This is from Luigi Mangione's diary, as they called it at one point, and manifesto, as they called it another. In my opinion, I'm not a handwriting analysis. If I'm looking for handwriting analysis, I know I've seen enough shows. We're looking for words that have, like for example, if I highlight here, there's the word lark. It contains an R or an A. You would look in the documents, other documents he's written, such as the letter log in his handwriting, which we know is his, in the K. You would look for where he loops letters, whether he puts a little extra tail on a letter, and you would look for those definitive marks in other writing to if there's an argument on whether or not he wrote this or not. When I look at this, I see very sloppy handwriting. I see handwriting that doesn't match the neat, legible handwriting in the letter log. That's a first impression. It doesn't look the same to me. Now, so if the defense argues Luigi didn't write that notebook, it's not his handwriting, that's one thing. But early on indications are that the defense has stated that the notebook was Luigi's notebook. Whether this is his notebook or he had a notebook they're confessing to, that's going to be the key thing. But if this is the notebook that his defense has said is his notebook, and they're conceding that it's his handwriting, all of those are a bunch of ifs. If that's true, then it doesn't matter, because essentially this is a signed confession. Again, are they going to argue that that was his handwriting or not his handwriting? But it doesn't look like his handwriting in my unexpert opinion. And here's the letter to the feds. This is his signed confession. Again, sloppy. I don't understand why, if you're going to confess to the feds, you wouldn't have typed something out neatly and sent it as an email ahead of time before the murder or whatever. This sloppily written to the feds thing. And by the way, I want to bring this up, and this is going to be a super unpopular thing. Good thing it's buried at the back side of this video. There have been plenty of in this country, and I want to make this clear. I'm not saying this happened, but there are plenty of cases in America of coerced confessions. This cannot go without being said. Many people will say, look, the defendant wrote it in his own handwriting. He wrote a confession. One of the things they ask you to do almost all the time when you're being interrogated and you've been interrogated for hours and hours and hours is, okay, after we finally broke you and you've confessed, let's get a written confession. And they'll use that in a court of law to say, of course he did it. Not only did he confess, and we've got it on audio and video, but he wrote it in his own handwriting. I confess to doing these crimes. It has come out in America. There's a Netflix special, I think, on false confessions. Coerced confessions, where people are intimidated or strong-armed into making a confession, either through coercion, meaning they're threatening you. By the way, this was part of the Gone Girls documentary on Netflix, where police came in and threatened to kill a guy, to give him a hot shot and overdose him on drugs, and threatened to kill his mother if he fought the police system. That is an example of police tactics. They're not above. Police are not above forcing confessions. So that's another thing. Will the defense say, yeah, maybe Luigi Mangione wrote these things, but maybe he was forced to do so under duress. Maybe he was forced to do so because he was coerced into signing a confession because what was happening behind closed doors. We don't know, and I'm not saying. So don't go repeat devil's advocates just said that happened. What I'm saying is that does happen in America. It has happened many times. There's Netflix specials on false confessions because a lot of people in America think if a person confessed to something, that means they did it. Pay attention. Watch some of those shows. Educate yourself on false confessions. False confessions happen all the time. People confess to things that they didn't do. Sometimes it's even incomprehensible. Sometimes people convince themselves they must have done it because they've just been beaten down after so many hours of interrogation, told, hey, look, or they're intimidated with, you're going down for this, period. We're going to kill you for murder. But if you admit to doing it, the court will take some leniency on you because you're at least admitting it. So come clean and admit it and things will go better for you. And I can see how a lot of people would feel. If I feel like there's no way I'm going to beat this rap, and it's true, look, we're going to get you on this. The only way you can help yourself is to finally admit and show some kind of sorrow for what you did, and maybe they'll go lenient on you. And that has caused people to confess to things that they didn't do because they're convinced they're going to get convicted anyways. So they confess so that they'll get a lesser sentence or some leniency when they may not have done it, but they just simply wanted to be like, look, I'm going down for it whether I did it or not, so I might as well try to make it better on myself. So that is it, folks. That's 3 hours. I could go much, much longer. You're already hating it. I know. I can already feel the backlash. Most of you probably won't even watch this series. If you did, let me know. I'm curious. But I don't suspect a lot of you are going to watch this long series. And I hope it doesn't lose me, people. Most of you will probably just decide not to watch it. But if you made it this far, let me make my last pitch on the way out. I am not acting, holy shit. I'm not asking anyone to commit acts of violence. I am not condoning acts of violence. What we are doing is we are talking about something that's already been done. Now that this has been done, let's have the bigger discussion. That does not make me a terrorist sympathizer. If Luigi Mangione, because he has the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law, and we know that the prosecution is going to say, absolutely, this guy did it. That's the prosecution's job. We're still waiting for the defense to admit to all these things. Did Luigi write those things? Did Luigi make a confession? Are you going to concede that Luigi did it and there's some other defense? We don't even know yet. We're way too early in this case to say Luigi Mangione did it. But we know that the prosecution's point is, yes, he did it. That's the way it works in America. But I am asking us to start having that bigger conversation. And you, prosecution, are going to try to tell people that makes me sick and despicable for talking about how shitty the healthcare system is. If you want to educate yourself a little bit on how bad the healthcare system is, read Elizabeth Rosenthal's An American Sickness. If you can't, by the way, and I'm going to pitch this in another video as well. I just remembered. Here's a way to watch in an entertaining fashion The American Sickness. There's a television show on Netflix. It's been several seasons now, mini seasons. I swear to you, this show called The Resident on Netflix. Really good show, really entertaining, very captivating. You'll like it just for entertainment purposes. Here's my take. That TV show called The Resident is literally taking Elizabeth Rosenthal's book and making episodes out of every chapter. It's straight from the book. Almost every single thing that you see happening, all the sick, twisted, manipulative tactics of hospitals and the insurance industry is brought to light in this show called The Resident. And they're literally, in my opinion, taking Elizabeth Rosenthal's book and ripping it out chapter by chapter and making episodes about it. So if she bitches about a certain type of practice like MBUs, which is a way to rate whether a doctor is being effective enough in billing, Elizabeth Rosenthal has a chapter about that. There'll be an episode in The Resident talking about MVUs and RVUs. Sorry, RVUs. I got the initials backward. Relative value units. So I had that backwards for a moment. But the point being is that they literally are ripping chapter from chapter out of it. So if you don't want to read the book because it's dry, you don't want to listen to me ramble and rage about it and relate it to Luigi Mangione like I do in my series. I have a book series on here called Luigi's Bookshelf, An American Sickness. I'm going to not only read Elizabeth Rosenthal's book to you, but I'm going to rant and relate it to Luigi Mangione over and over again. If that doesn't appeal to you, maybe consider watching The Resident, because it's a fictionalized, but not so fiction, depiction of how bad America's healthcare system is. That's enough for now, people. Have a great day.